Sarah Mitchell stood at the entrance of Denver International Airport's private terminal, her designer laptop bag hanging confidently from her shoulder. The morning sun reflected off the sleek private jets parked on the tarmac, their metal bodies gleaming like polished silver. At 38 years old, she had grown used to being one of the few black women in high-level tech meetings, but what she was about to experience would shake even her well-maintained composure. The terminal's automatic doors slid open smoothly, releasing a burst of cool air into the warm morning. Sarah checked her watch. 8:45 a.m. She was early for her 9:30 a.m. flight, just as she liked to be. Her tech company had just secured a major deal in Silicon Valley, and this private jet trip was both a necessity and a small celebration of their success. As she approached the security checkpoint, Sarah noticed something odd. The guard, a middle-aged white man whose name tag read James Porter, was casually chatting with other passengers. His demeanor was relaxed, almost friendly, as he quickly checked their documents and waved them through. But when his eyes landed on Sarah, his entire posture changed. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your documentation," Porter said, his voice notably cooler than it had been moments before. Sarah maintained her professional smile, already familiar with this subtle shift in treatment that she'd experienced countless times before. She handed over her identification and flight documents, all perfectly in order. Porter studied them with exaggerated scrutiny, holding each paper up to the light as if checking for watermarks. Behind her, other passengers continued to stream through the second security line, many with far less thorough checks. "And how did you say you obtained access to this flight?" Porter asked, his tone suggesting that something wasn't quite right. Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I'm the CEO of Mitchell Tech Solutions. We chartered this flight for a business meeting in San Francisco," she replied, keeping her tone professional despite the growing discomfort of the situation. Porter's eyebrows rose slightly. "The CEO? And you don't have any additional verification of that?" A few feet away, a young man in his 20s had begun to slowly take out his phone, sensing that something wasn't right about the interaction he was witnessing. Sarah noticed but kept her attention focused on the guard. "My documentation is complete and identical to what other passengers have provided," Sarah stated firmly. "I've shown you my ID, flight confirmation, and company credentials." Porter shuffled the papers again, making a show of reading each line. "Well, you understand we have to be thorough with security these days. We can't just let anyone walk onto a private jet." The emphasis he placed on anyone wasn't lost on Sarah or the other passengers who had begun to slow their pace, watching the scene unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed unsure whether to speak up. "Is there a problem here?" A sharp voice cut through the tension. David Chen, Sarah's business partner, had come in from the tarmac after wondering about the delay. He stood there in his crisp suit, looking between Sarah and the guard with growing concern. "Just doing my job, sir," Porter replied, his tone shifting to something more defensive. "Can't be too careful with private jet access. Need to make sure everyone who comes through really belongs here." David's eyes narrowed at the implication. "Sarah Mitchell is the CEO of our company and a frequent flyer through this terminal. What exactly needs to be verified?" The young man with the phone had positioned himself to capture the interaction clearly now, though he tried to appear casual about it. Porter seemed to notice the phone too, but instead of backing down, he doubled down on his position. "I'm just following protocol," he insisted, though he couldn't quite meet David's eyes. "If Ms. Mitchell is who she says she is, I'm sure we can sort this out. But for now, I can't let her proceed without additional verification." Sarah stood there, her expression composed but her mind racing. In all her years of success and achievement, these moments still came, these small, stubborn reminders that some people would always see her skin color before they saw her accomplishments. But something felt different about this time. Maybe it was the young man with the phone, or maybe it was simply that she had finally had enough. Little did any of them know, this moment at a private terminal security checkpoint was about to spark a conversation that would extend far beyond the walls of Denver International Airport. Tom Wilson had never planned to be part of a viral video. The 26-year-old marketing executive was simply waiting for his own flight when he witnessed the scene unfolding at the security checkpoint. His hands trembled slightly as he held his phone, trying to keep the camera steady while appearing to scroll through social media. Through his phone screen, he watched as the situation grew more tense. Sarah Mitchell stood tall, her burgundy blazer and black pants perfectly pressed, looking every bit the CEO she was. But James Porter, the security guard, continued his unnecessary questioning. "I've already shown you my company ID card with my photo," Sarah said, her voice remaining remarkably calm. "You can clearly see I'm the same person in the photo." Other passengers had begun to gather in small clusters, some pretending to check their phones while others openly stared. The morning sun streamed through the terminal's large windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. David Chen, still standing protectively near Sarah, pulled out his phone. "Should I call our company lawyer?" he asked, loud enough for Porter to hear. "Or perhaps the terminal manager would like to explain why we're being delayed." Porter's face reddened, but he didn't back down. "Sir, I'm just doing my job. We have procedures." "Procedures that you didn't apply to any other passenger this morning," Tom suddenly spoke up, surprising even himself. His phone was now openly recording. "I've been sitting here for 20 minutes, and you haven't asked anyone else for additional verification." The guard's head snapped toward Tom, finally noticing the recording. His expression shifted from authority to uncertainty. "Recording isn't allowed in this area," he said quickly. "Actually," Sarah interjected, her voice clear and confident, "there's no such policy. Private terminals are required to allow recording in public areas for security purposes. Would you like me to cite the relevant aviation regulation?" Several onlookers murmured in approval. A young flight attendant who had been watching nervously from nearby finally stepped forward. "Mr. Porter, I can verify that Ms. Mitchell is a regular passenger. She flew with us just last month." Porter's authority was crumbling, but like many people caught in the wrong, he dug in deeper. "That may be so, but today's procedures require—" "What procedures exactly?" David interrupted. "Please show us the written policy that requires additional verification beyond what Ms. Mitchell has already provided." Tom's phone captured it all: Porter's stammering response, the growing crowd of witnesses, and most importantly, Sarah's dignified handling of the situation. His video clearly showed other passengers walking through the second security line with minimal checks. None of them black, none of them questioned. A tall woman in an airport management uniform finally hurried over, her heels clicking against the floor. "What seems to be the problem here?" she asked, looking between Porter and the small crowd that had gathered. "The problem," Sarah said firmly, "is that your security guard has spent 15 minutes attempting to deny me access to my chartered flight, despite my having complete and valid documentation. The same documentation he accepted from every other passenger this morning." The manager, whose name tag read Linda Martinez, took one look at the recording phones, the gathering crowd, and Sarah's perfectly prepared documents. Her face showed she understood the situation immediately. "Miss Mitchell, please accept our sincerest apologies," Linda said, shooting a sharp look at Porter. "You're clear to proceed to your flight. Mr. Porter, I need to speak with you in my office immediately." As Sarah and David finally walked toward their plane, Tom stopped recording. His hands were still shaking slightly, but now from adrenaline rather than nervousness. He looked down at his phone, at the video he just captured. After a moment's hesitation, he posted it to his social media accounts with a simple caption: "Witness this injustice at Denver International's private terminal this morning. Share widely." What Tom didn't know then was that his video would rack up millions of views within hours. He didn't know that news stations would soon be calling him for interviews, or that his decision to speak up and record would help spark a national conversation. And Sarah Mitchell, walking confidently toward her waiting plane, didn't yet realize that this incident would become much more than just another example of the discrimination she had faced throughout her career. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments, captured by someone who simply decided not to stay silent. The next few hours moved at lightning speed. Sarah Mitchell's private jet had barely taken off from Denver when Tom Wilson's video began spreading across social media like wildfire. By the time she landed in San Francisco, the clip had already caught the attention of major news networks. Back at Denver International Airport, Linda Martinez sat in her office, rubbing her temples as she watched the video for the 5th time. On her desk, 3 phones were ringing nonstop. The incident was quickly becoming a PR nightmare for the airport. "Mr. Porter," she said to the security guard sitting stiffly across from her desk, "please explain to me why you felt the need to subject Ms. Mitchell to extra screening." Her voice was tight with controlled anger. James Porter shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The confidence he had shown earlier at the security checkpoint had melted away. "I was just being thorough," he mumbled, but even he seemed to realize how weak that excuse sounded. "Thorough?" Linda pulled up the security footage from that morning on her computer screen. "Let's review the past 2 hours of your thorough screening process." The footage clearly showed Porter waving through passenger after passenger with barely a glance at their documents, until Sarah Mitchell arrived. Meanwhile, in the airport's main security office, other staff members were reviewing Porter's employment history. What they found was troubling. 3 previous complaints had been filed against him for similar incidents, but they had been buried in paperwork and never properly addressed. "How did we miss this?" whispered Janet Kim, the head of HR, as she flipped through Porter's file. "These complaints go back 2 years. The airport's phones kept ringing. Local news vans had already started gathering outside the main terminal. Reporters were requesting statements, and social media was exploding with comments and shares of Tom's video. Up in the air, Sarah sat in her luxury seat, unaware of the storm brewing below. She was focused on her upcoming business meeting, reviewing presentations on her laptop. David Chen, however, couldn't stop checking his phone. "Sarah," he said, showing her his screen, "the video's gone viral. Over 2 million views already." Sarah paused her work and watched the footage. It was strange seeing herself in the video, standing there with such composure while facing such blatant discrimination. She noticed details she had missed in the moment: the sympathetic looks from other passengers, the young flight attendant's brave step forward, Tom's steady hand capturing it all. "I never wanted to become a viral story," Sarah said quietly, looking out the plane window at the clouds below. "Sometimes we don't choose these moments," David replied. "They choose us." Back at the airport, things were reaching a boiling point. Civil rights organizations were already calling for investigations. The airport's social media team was overwhelmed with messages. Local news stations had begun airing the footage, though some tried to downplay the racial aspects of the incident. Linda Martinez was now in an emergency meeting with the airport's senior management team. The large conference room was tense with worry and rushed discussions. "We need to get ahead of this," said Robert Thompson, the airport's PR director. "Issue a statement, suspend Porter pending investigation, show we're taking action." "That's not enough," Linda argued, standing up from her chair. "We need to address the systemic issues here. Those ignored complaints, the lack of proper oversight, the training gaps. This isn't just about one security guard." As they debated their response, Tom Wilson was being interviewed by a local news station in the airport cafe. His hands were still shaking slightly, but his voice was firm. "I couldn't just stand there and watch it happen," he explained to the reporter. "You know what really struck me? How unsurprised Ms. Mitchell seemed. Like she'd dealt with this kind of treatment before and was just used to it. That's what made me start recording. Because this shouldn't be something anyone gets used to." The day wasn't even half over, but the incident had already sparked a conversation that would extend far beyond one airport or one security checkpoint. It had become a mirror reflecting deeper issues in society, captured in a few minutes of phone footage that would be impossible to ignore. And in San Francisco, as her plane began its descent, Sarah Mitchell prepared herself for what she knew would come next. This wasn't just about her anymore. It had become something bigger, something that demanded action and change. The real challenge was just beginning. By evening, the story had taken on a life of its own. Different media outlets were spinning the incident in dramatically different ways, creating a stark contrast in how the same event could be interpreted and presented to the public. Channel 7 News, a local Denver station, ran their first story with the headline, "Minor dispute at private terminal causes delay." Their initial report barely mentioned race, focusing instead on general airport security procedures. The anchor, Mike Reynolds, spoke in measured tones about standard security protocols and possible misunderstandings. But social media told a different story. Tom Wilson's video continued to spread, with celebrities and civil rights leaders sharing it and adding their own experiences. The hashtag #PrivateJetWhileBlack was trending nationwide, forcing mainstream media to confront the racial aspects they had initially ignored. Sarah Mitchell's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since she landed in San Francisco. After her business meeting, which she insisted on completing despite the chaos, she sat in her hotel room watching the coverage unfold on multiple channels. And now, exclusive footage from this morning's incident at Denver International Airport, announced Lisa Chen on National News Network. The coverage split the screen between Tom's viral video and statistics about discrimination in air travel. This raises serious questions about bias in private aviation security. Meanwhile, back in Denver, local newspaper reporter Maria Rodriguez was digging deeper. She'd spent the afternoon interviewing airport staff and discovered a pattern that went beyond one security guard. There were warning signs, a junior staff member told her, speaking anonymously. Other employees had reported similar incidents, but the complaints always seemed to disappear into the system. The story was evolving hour by hour. Some outlets tried to investigate Porter's background, while others focused on Sarah's achievements as a tech CEO. A few conservative channels attempted to defend Porter, suggesting there might be more to the story, but the video evidence made such defenses difficult to maintain. In her hotel room, Sarah watched as her personal experience became a national talking point. CNN invited civil rights lawyers to discuss the legal implications. Fox News debated airport security protocols. MSNBC ran a segment on discrimination in luxury travel services. Her phone rang again, another interview request, this time from a major morning show. David Chen, who had been managing the media response, advised her to be selective. "You don't owe them your story," he said during their evening call, "but if you choose to speak, it could make a difference." Sarah thought carefully about her next steps. She had never wanted to become the face of this issue, but she recognized the opportunity to create real change. Back in Denver, the local news coverage was shifting. Channel 7, which had initially downplayed the incident, was now facing backlash for their earlier reporting. Their evening broadcast took a notably different tone. "We apologize for our earlier coverage," Mike Reynolds stated, looking uncomfortable. After reviewing the full video and speaking with witnesses, it's clear this was more than a simple misunderstanding. Social media users were quick to point out the contrast between initial local reports and the viral video evidence. Media criticism websites began publishing articles about how different outlets had handled the story, highlighting the gap between traditional media's careful approach and social media's raw immediacy. Tom Wilson, whose video had started it all, appeared on several national news programs via video link. "I just recorded what I saw," he explained to one interviewer. "The media can spin it however they want, but the video speaks for itself." By nightfall, the story had evolved into a national discussion about not just racial bias, but also about how such incidents are reported and who gets to control the narrative. Sarah finally decided to speak. She chose a respected black female journalist for her first interview, scheduled for the next morning. Her media team released a simple statement: "What happened today reflects a larger issue that needs to be addressed. I look forward to having an honest conversation about making real change." As Tuesday turned to Wednesday, the incident had become more than just a viral video or a news story. It had become a catalyst for examining how society handles, reports, and discusses discrimination, especially in spaces traditionally reserved for privilege and wealth. And tomorrow's headlines were still being written. On Wednesday morning, the airport's internal investigation team gathered in a basement conference room. 6 people sat around a large table covered with files, laptops, and coffee cups. Janet Kim from HR led the meeting, her face showing signs of a sleepless night. "Let's start with the older complaints," Janet said, spreading out 3 manila folders. "We found similar incidents involving James Porter that were never properly addressed." The first complaint was from 18 months ago. A black female doctor had reported being excessively questioned about her credentials. The second came from a Hispanic business owner who was delayed for nearly an hour. The third involved an Asian tech entrepreneur who missed his flight due to extra security measures. Linda Martinez, who had been taking detailed notes, looked up. "All successful professionals, all people of color, all flying private jets," she observed. And all these complaints were basically buried. The investigation team's youngest member, Marcus Thompson, was reviewing security footage from the past 6 months. His laptop showed countless hours of Porter's interactions with passengers. The pattern was impossible to miss. "Look at this," Marcus said, turning his screen. "White passengers, average security check time, 45 seconds. For passengers of color, average time, 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Some checks lasted over 15 minutes. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Sarah Mitchell was preparing for her first television interview. She sat in a hotel conference room while a makeup artist applied powder to her face. The interviewer, Regina Brooks from National Morning News, sat across from her, reviewing her notes. "We're live in 5 minutes," a producer called out. The interview started with the viral video, but quickly moved to deeper issues. Sarah spoke with calm authority about her experiences as a black woman in the tech world. "This wasn't my first encounter with discrimination," Sarah explained, her voice steady. "But it's time these hidden biases are exposed, especially in spaces like private aviation where they think no one is watching." Back in Denver, the investigation had uncovered more troubling details. Porter's training records showed he had skipped several required diversity sessions. His supervisor had noted concerns about his behavior but had never taken formal action. "How did our system fail so badly?" Janet asked, rubbing her temples. The team had been working for hours, and the evidence of systematic problems kept mounting. A knock on the conference room door interrupted them. A young security officer entered, looking nervous. "I have something you should see," she said, placing a USB drive on the table. The drive contained emails between Porter and several other security staff members. The messages showed a pattern of profiling passengers based on race, with staff members warning each other about suspicious travelers who were simply people of color in business attire. Linda's face darkened as she read the emails. "This goes beyond one person," she said. "We have a culture problem." In another part of the airport, Tom Wilson was back, this time with investigators. He walked them through exactly what he had witnessed, pointing out details that weren't visible in his video. "The thing that really got to me," Tom explained, "was how routine it seemed. Like this was just another day at work for Porter, questioning someone's right to be here based on how they looked." The investigation team worked through lunch, ordering sandwiches that sat mostly untouched. They were building a timeline of incidents, connecting dots that should have been connected long ago. By late afternoon, they had compiled enough evidence to fill a thick report. The findings were clear. This wasn't just about one guard or one incident. There was a systemic failure in training, oversight, and accountability. Janet stood up, stretching after hours of reviewing documents. "We need to present this to the board tomorrow," she said. "And we need to recommend more than just firing Porter. We need complete systemic change." As the team packed up their materials, Linda's phone buzzed with a news alert. Sarah Mitchell's interview was making waves. The story had evolved from a viral video to a national conversation about institutional bias. "You know what's interesting?" Marcus said, closing his laptop. "If Porter hadn't been so blatant with Ms. Mitchell, if Tom hadn't recorded it, all of this might have stayed hidden. Sometimes it takes one big incident to expose all the little ones that came before." The investigation wasn't over, but its direction was clear. The real question now was, how would the airport respond to evidence of such widespread problems? The next day's board meeting would provide the answer. The airport's boardroom buzzed with tension on Thursday morning. 12 board members sat around a massive oak table, their faces serious as they reviewed the investigation team's findings. Large windows overlooked the runway where private jets took off and landed, a constant reminder of what had brought them here. Robert Thompson, the PR director, stood at the front of the room with a PowerPoint presentation. "The media coverage isn't going away," he explained, showing slides of news headlines. "We need to take decisive action." Janet Kim and Linda Martinez sat together, their thick report open in front of them. They had spent the night preparing their recommendations for systematic changes. "It's not enough to just fire Porter," Linda said, standing up to address the board. "Our entire security system needs an overhaul." The investigation revealed at least 20 similar incidents in the past 2 years alone. The board chairman, William Chen, leaned forward in his leather chair. "What exactly are you proposing?" Janet clicked to the next slide, which listed their recommendations. Complete retraining of all security personnel. New oversight committee led by diversity experts. Monthly review of security interaction data. Installation of body cameras for all security staff. Anonymous reporting system for passengers. Regular external audits of security practices. The cost estimates made several board members wince. but the potential damage to their reputation would cost far more. Meanwhile, across town, James Porter sat in his small apartment, watching the news coverage of his actions. His phone had been ringing constantly, mostly reporters, but also a few right-wing groups offering to help tell this side. He had declined them all, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had done. Back in San Francisco, Sarah Mitchell was meeting with her company's legal team. They weren't just planning a lawsuit, they were developing a broader strategy for industry-wide change. The private aviation industry has operated like an exclusive club for too long, Sarah told her lawyers. Maybe it's time someone pushed open those doors. Her phone buzzed with a text from David Chen. Denver Airport Board meeting happening now. Sources say big changes coming. In the boardroom, the debate had grown heated. Some members argued for minimal changes, worried about costs and logistics. Others pushed for complete reform. Look at these numbers, Linda said, pointing to their findings. Average security check times: 45 seconds for white passengers, 4.5 minutes for people of color. That's not coincidence. That's systematic bias. William Chen stood up, silencing the room. As the first Asian American chairman of the airport board, he had faced his own battles with discrimination. When I started flying private jets 20 years ago, he said quietly, I was often mistaken for the crew. I told myself things would change naturally with time. He paused, looking around the room. They haven't. Not enough. Maybe it's time we forced that change. The vote that followed was unanimous. The board approved all recommended changes, plus additional measures. Immediate termination of James Porter. Public apology to Sarah Mitchell. Creation of a passenger bill of rights. Partnership with civil rights organizations for ongoing training. Industry-wide initiative to combat discrimination in private aviation. Robert Thompson immediately began drafting the public statement, while Janet and Linda started working on implementation plans. By afternoon, news of the airport's decision had reached Sarah. She watched the press conference from her hotel room as William Chen announced the sweeping changes. This isn't just about one incident or one airport, Chen said to the cameras. This is about changing an industry that has often prioritized exclusivity over equality. Outside the boardroom, Janet and Linda shared a tired smile. Think this will make a difference? Linda asked. It already has, Janet replied, showing her phone. Other private airports across the country were calling, asking about their new protocols. The ripple effect had begun. As Thursday turned to evening, the story had evolved from a viral video to a moment of real institutional change. Sarah Mitchell's experience, captured by Tom Wilson's phone, had cracked open a door that had been sealed for too long. And behind that door, more changes were waiting to happen. The law offices of Johnson & Williams occupied the entire 32nd floor of a downtown Denver skyscraper. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week after the incident, Sarah Mitchell sat in a large conference room with her legal team. The city spread out below them through floor-to-ceiling windows. This isn't just about money, Sarah explained to her lawyers. I want real change. She wore the same burgundy blazer from the viral video, now seen by over 20 million people worldwide. Diana Johnson, the firm's top civil rights attorney, nodded while spreading documents across the polished table. We've received calls from 15 other passengers who experienced similar discrimination at private terminals across the country. They want to join the lawsuit. The legal team had spent the weekend building their case. It wasn't just about James Porter anymore. The lawsuit named the airport authority, the security company, and 3 other private aviation facilities where discriminatory practices had been reported. Meanwhile, at a small coffee shop near the airport, Tom Wilson met with civil rights investigators. His video had become key evidence, but he had more to share. I have timestamps of other incidents I witnessed that morning, Tom said, pushing forward a notebook. Times, dates, descriptions. I started keeping track after the 3rd time I saw it happen. Across town, James Porter attended a mandatory meeting with his union representative. The union had initially planned to defend him, but after seeing all the evidence, they changed their approach. The best we can do is negotiate a resignation, his representative explained. And you'll need to agree to attend bias training before working in security again. Porter stared into his coffee cup, his face tired. I never thought of myself as racist, he said quietly. But watching that video, seeing myself, I didn't like what I saw. Back at Mitchell Tech Solutions' temporary Denver office, David Chen was on a video call with aviation industry leaders. The incident had sparked a larger conversation about diversity in private aviation. "We're launching an industry-wide task force," announced the head of the Private Aviation Association. Ms. Mitchell has agreed to co-chair. "We want to examine everything from security protocols to hiring practices." Sarah's lawsuit was making waves beyond Denver. Other airports began reviewing their security footage, looking for similar patterns. Some didn't like what they found. In Chicago, a private terminal fired 2 guards after discovering discriminatory practices. In Miami, an aviation company launched mandatory weekly training sessions. In New York, a private jet company hired its first diversity officer. At the Denver courthouse, Sarah's legal team filed their class action lawsuit. The document was thick with evidence, statistics, testimonies, videos, and emails showing years of systematic discrimination. "This case isn't just about one morning at one airport," Diana Johnson told reporters outside the courthouse. "It's about changing an entire industry's culture." The media gathered around Diana as she continued. "We have evidence of discrimination at private terminals in 12 different states. This is a national problem that requires a national solution." Inside her Denver hotel room, Sarah watched the press conference on TV. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "You're doing what needs to be done, babe. Keep going." Later that afternoon, Sarah met with a group of young black aviation students. They gathered in a small classroom at a local flight school, eager to hear her story. "Don't let anyone tell you where you belong," she told them, her voice firm. "The sky belongs to everyone." As day turned to evening, Sarah's legal team worked late into the night, preparing for the battles ahead. They knew the defendants would have powerful lawyers and deep pockets, but they'd also had something powerful, undeniable evidence, and a client who wasn't afraid to fight. Diana looked up from her stack of papers. "You know what's different about this case?" she asked her colleagues. "Usually, discrimination happens in the shadows. But this time, we have it all on video. They can't deny what everyone saw with their own eyes." The lawsuit would take months, maybe years, to resolve, but already, changes were happening. Other companies were reviewing their practices, updating their training, and rethinking their approach to security. What started as one woman's humiliating experience had grown into something much bigger, a movement for change in an industry that had operated in the shadows for too long. And this was just the beginning. 1 year later, Sarah Mitchell stood at the podium in the Denver International Airport's main conference room. The same room where the board had voted for changes 12 months ago now hosted a different kind of meeting. "Welcome to the first National Conference on Equality in Aviation," Sarah announced to a packed room. Faces looked back at her. Airport executives, security personnel, civil rights leaders, and industry professionals from across the country. In the front row sat Tom Wilson, now working as a diversity consultant for several major airports. Next to him was Linda Martinez, recently promoted to head of security operations after her role in exposing the systematic problems. "1 year ago, I was denied access to my own chartered flight," Sarah continued, her voice strong. "Today, I'm happy to report that the incident led to real change." She clicked to her first slide, showing the results of their efforts. 50 private terminals had adopted new security protocols. Complaint rates had dropped by 78%. Minority employment in private aviation had increased by 45%. Security check times now showed no racial disparities. Body cameras had become standard for all security staff. In the back of the room, a familiar face slipped in quietly. James Porter, who had gone through extensive bias training, now worked with civil rights groups, sharing his story of transformation. "It's not enough to change rules," he often told training groups. "We have to change hearts and minds, starting with our own." The lawsuit had settled 6 months ago. The terms included not just monetary compensation, but mandatory industry-wide changes. Sarah had used most of her settlement money to start the Mitchell Foundation for Aviation Equality. David Chen watched from the side of the stage, smiling as Sarah shared their latest initiative, a scholarship program for minority students interested in aviation careers. "Next month, we'll welcome our first class of 30 students," Sarah announced. "Future pilots, aviation executives, and industry leaders who will ensure this field represents everyone. Janet Kim, still heading HR but now for the entire airport authority, stood to share their latest numbers. Security incidents were down, passenger satisfaction was up, and their new anonymous reporting system had caught potential problems before they became major incidents. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Janet said. The real change is in the culture. People speak up now. They don't look away. In the middle of the room sat Regina Brooks, the reporter who had first interviewed Sarah. She had gone on to create a documentary about discrimination in luxury travel, inspired by Sarah's story. The ripple effects went far beyond aviation. Regina explained in her recent interview with Time magazine. It made other exclusive industries look at their own practices. After the conference, Sarah walked through the private terminal where it all began. The security checkpoint looked different now, more professional, more welcoming. Security guards wore body cameras, and clear signs displayed passenger rights in multiple languages. Tom joined her walk. Hard to believe it started with a shaky foam video, he said. Sarah smiled. Sometimes all it takes is someone willing to show the truth. Later that evening, Sarah boarded another private jet. The security check was smooth, professional, and exactly 3 minutes long, the new standard time for all passengers regardless of race, gender, or appearance. As her plane took off into the sunset, Sarah opened her laptop to review applications for next year's scholarship program. Hundreds of young people, inspired by her story, wanted to join the aviation industry. In the terminal below, a new shift of security guards started their work. Their training had included watching the viral video from last year, now used as a teaching tool about what not to do and how to be better. The story had come full circle. What began as one woman's stand against discrimination had transformed an industry. It wasn't perfect. Change never is, but it was real, measurable, and growing. Diana Johnson, reviewing the year's progress in her law office, perhaps said it best. Sometimes it takes one moment of injustice, captured at the right time, shared with the right people, to wake everyone up. But it's what we do after we wake up that really matters. And in Denver, as night fell over the airport, a new generation of aviation professionals looked to the sky and saw not just planes, but possibilities. The end.